all. So we have a couple of guests here today. One's Elena. Thank you, Elena, for coming again. Another's Joanna. We're trying to get Joanna to join the club. So everybody start pressuring Joanna. Keep eating. I just want to get started with our inspiration. Sonia's going to give us an inspiration this morning. You're muted, Sonia. Sonia, you're muted. You're muted. You're muted. I can't hear you.
I can put your space bar. Holding the space bar and unmute the whole.
Press down your space bar, Sonia, and hold it.
I press, oh, there it is. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to share an inspiration with you this morning, and it's kind of a personal one. And hopefully it'll be an inspiration to some of you. I believe, and I know that attitudes and behaviors have gotten very intense lately, within the year or so. First, there's road rage, and Phil and I experienced it one time. We were coming out of Morgan Drive, which is across from the Shell station on Route 2A. And no one was coming from the Essex side, and no one was coming from the Williston side. So Phil went, and suddenly a car came out of the pickup came out of the Shell station. And we were quick, but he followed us. He followed us all through Mountain Road, all onto North Williston Road. And I was frightened. So we drove back to the police station in Williston, and I went in. He followed us there too and started yelling and screaming at us for coming out in front of it. And the police divided us up. They put me and Phil in one room and him in another. And then the police came back and he told us to leave, and we did. And he kept the other person there and tried to calm him down. But that was one example of how things are going. And I've also seen it on the cross or the intersection of Route 2 and Dorset Street, where people from other states sometimes don't know the pattern very well, and they get in the wrong lane and soon horns are tooting, etc. There's no patience anymore. I also see this in political ads, rude depiction of the opposite candidates. And also politicians themselves are really mean about their opponents. I'm wondering, did COVID or the pandemic cause this, or former political leaders? Unnamed by me. My inspiration came this past Sunday. Phil and I participated in the trunk or treat. Children were the inspiration. They would patiently wait their turn to go to a trunk. They did not scream or yell. They smiled, and they all said thank you. Once in a while, parents had to prompt them, but they had a smile and they said thank you. They respected each other. Why can't adults do the same? There is definitely hope in the future through our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia, and I'm so sorry that you and Phil had to go through that. That's very frightening. Oh, boy. Our Rotary Minute is coming from Chris Stewart, whom I'm trying to time so his mouth is full.
Well, mine's kind of an inspiration too, but it has a lot to do with Rotary. About 3.5 months ago, a woman that lives in Richmond, you've heard me talk about this before, was riding her bike with her friends in Boston, and she fell. She broke her neck, and she literally shattered the vertebrae in her neck, and the bone nicked the carotid, and she almost died. They had to cut her open right away, and So then a couple of months later, a month or so later, Sally got an email from a family in need of a ramp for this woman. So as usual, the people from the club stepped up and we got the materials there. We built the ramp, and the real Rotary minute / inspiration is the woman whom we built the ramp for. We finally got to meet her, and she came out with her mom, and Andrew and I were there, and Walter as well. And Phil also helped with the ramp. And it was just a really inspiring thing. Inspiring minute. It was really nice to meet her, and she came out, and she has since gained the use of her arms. She was paralyzed from the neck down. She has since gained full use of her arms. She has feeling in both legs and the quads and the toes. And that's a really good sign that she is actually going to get better. Yeah. Yeah. So our ramp, made with Rotary dollars, really helped this woman and her family because there was no other way to get in the house. One of the things that's most beautiful is the entire addition they put on the house just for the sole purpose of having her come back and live there was built with donated time and materials. The foundation, all the wood, the siding, the windows. I met a guy from Barry who did all the he made all custom trim for the inside. And just a lot of people stepped forward. And it was just really a beautiful moment. And they really were happy that we came there. So that's my inspiration minute. Armand also helped.
And as I recall, Chris, the ramp that you built separate from the Rotary Club for the Tomasis
Yep,
saved a man's life
that's right.
because the house burned. And the only way the man in the wheelchair could get out was on your ramp.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. We're proud to have you in our club. So just a few quick business items. What? Oh, Barb. Hi, Barb.
Hi, I have something I want to say after you say something.
Okay. So first I want to read a thank you note that we think was given to us a while back, but Charlie lost it in his car. Thanks, Charlie,
Don't point any fingers. no.
or anything. All Rotarians take responsibility. So this is from Becky Martell from the Connecting Youth Mentoring Program at Wilson Central School. You may recall that at our changeover, Leslie presented her with a check for their Angel Fund. And this is her thank you. Thank you so much for the donation to the Angel Fund. As you know, this partnership is an important component to the Connecting Youth Program. I look forward to working together. We'll hear more from them. We still need speakers for February and March. I'm reminding you that February meetings are going to be lunch meetings. So it's going to be a lot of fun to come to a meeting in the daylight. And all of you know people, you all know people, people who have done adventures, who have traveled, who have started businesses, who have made a name for themselves somewhere in their community. All you need to do is call up one of those folks and ask them if they'd speak for us at lunchtime. We are going to save one lunch meeting, we're hoping, for our beloved Bill Skiff. I hope he'll come to all the meetings, but we're going to make him a speaker for one of them so he can tell us stories and make us laugh all the way through lunch. I want to thank everybody who went to Trunk or Treat. It was a smashing success. I don't think we ever figured out exactly how many kids there were, but we think there were well over 200 kids there. And probably 15 cars. I think Leslie or somebody connected with two people that brought cars that were neither in the church nor in the Rotary Club. But when they saw our ads on Front Porch Fordham, they decided they wanted to come. They came and parked their cars and gave out candy. Yeah, 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 I think so too. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you.
Has actually said they would like to join in.
Yeah, so we'll keep that connection open. So our next event is next Friday at 7:30 in the morning in the little park next to the town clerk's office. We're doing a Veterans Day celebration and we will be dedicating the Deb Beckett bench.
So it'll be
Um,
here.
What?
It'll be here.
It will be here. Yep. It may not be put in the permanent spot. There's some discussion about the location and the other benches that are there. So it's going to be there, but it may end up in a slightly different spot. But we'll see. Somebody asked this question. We are meeting the day before on the 10th. So even though we have Veterans Day, we will meet at our regular Rotary meeting. Another reminder, December 10th is our next blood drive. You can sign up now. Of course, Leslie signed up right away. Made the rest of us look like.
I just was inspired by you all, so I wanted to.
Right, I'm sure there'd be plenty of spots though, so y'all can sign up for December 10th. We are in the position of planning the senior luncheon. I need a show of hands of people who would be willing to help with some organization and can meet for a few minutes after today's meeting. Jude, Chris, Andrew. Okay, wait.
Hey, while she is writing this stuff down, I wanted to tell you guys that Armand discovered that the people who built the bench for us are related to the people we built the ramp for. In fact, the father of the young woman works at his uncle's shed, his granite shed.
Wow,
Small world.
this is a small world. Charlie, you're volunteering to help with the senior lunch. Great. Okay, I think I get,
Sherry,
oh my goodness.
anybody else?
All right, so the whole club is welcome to stay after. Joanna, we'll have a quick meeting after.
I mean, seriously.
Right, what? I'm pretty sure. I will check. You will check. You check. That's your job. Switch the time around from the morning 2 hours to the afternoon. I think it's gonna be 3 or 4 hours, like 10 to 2 maybe. It's December 15th. And Barbara, you have an announcement.
Yes, this is a second announcement from Becky Martell. A huge thank you for the book fair coupons. A more formal thank you is to come. The kiddos were thrilled and so appreciative of the gift of the book. It was so amazing to be able to hand each of them a coupon and see them so appreciative. One mentee commented on how grateful he is for this program and that all the people have done for him and other kids. So I just wanted you to know that the $500 was delivered. The kids went to the book fair and everyone got at least one book. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks, Barb. Great. And now we'll have our speaker. Susan, you want to introduce her?
Well, as a 13-year member of the Rotary Club, we might think that Debbie needs no introduction. We know her well, her friendship, her many efforts in support of our club, including mastering the 5K results spreadsheet. Yeah. Spearheading the Martin Luther King Jr. Day observance and serving as a member of the PR committee, among many other things. But it is also good to be reminded of her impressive background. Debbie has served as executive director of Vermont Interfaith Action for the past 14 years. She is an ordained minister who pastored 2 successive congregations in California. And she worked as a freelance communication consultant in Bangladesh for 7 years, writing, producing, and directing award-winning videos for poverty alleviation projects. Since moving to Vermont, Debbie has preached at or has served as temporary pastor for numerous United Church of Christ congregations. She has also served as the chair of the board for the UCC's statewide entity and as the moderator of the statewide UCC annual meeting. Debbie's elected public service has included 6 years on the Williston Select Board and 4 years as a state senator representing Chittenden County. And Debbie is a graduate of Stanford University and the Fuller Theological Seminary. And she also completed a fellowship at Cambridge University, England in preaching and ethics. So without further ado, Debbie.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Nice introduction. Great. And today I'm talking about something that Vermont Interfaith Action has been working on for quite some time. And it's the Prop 2. And we have a slideshow that is going to happen. I'm sure. There it is. Great. Yeah, awesome. So Vermont Interfaith Action, the group that I direct, is a coalition of over 70 member and affiliated congregations throughout the state from different faith traditions. And we work together on issues of social justice, and we try to make systemic change rather than do direct service. So over the years, we've worked on healthcare reform policy, on housing policy quite a lot. And then recently we have kind of shifted to a lot of racial justice work. And so we have partnered with the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, which is based in Burlington and is directed by Mark Hughes. And that our campaign is associated with the Abolish Slavery National Network because there are actually 4 other states besides Vermont that are trying to get a proposal to amend their constitutions passed as we are doing in Vermont. So I know probably many of you have already voted, so this may be kind of a moot point for you. I hope you voted in favor of Prop 2, but you know, if you haven't, you'll find out a little bit more info. And even if you have, I hope that this will be informative to you about why we think it's important to do this in our Constitution and what it will lead to in the future. So next slide, please. So just to talk a little bit about the writing of the Vermont Constitution, probably many of you know this already, but Vermont was not actually a state. It didn't exist really. It was not one of the 13 colonies. So it was on land. It was land that was claimed by New York and New Hampshire. So we actually had to declare ourselves, and that happened in 1777 with a constitution that was based largely on Pennsylvania's constitution. And it was written by a group of men in a weekend in Windsor, Vermont. So that's probably in a tavern. That's right. That's right. And we've been taught for a long time that our Constitution prohibited slavery, but there's some nuance to that actually. Next slide, please. So what our Constitution has actually said for 245 years is this is the first article, and you'll see that the beginning part is some very nice assertions, very magnanimous principles that all persons are born equally free and independent and have certain natural, inherent, and unalienable rights, amongst which are the enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. Very, very positive, excellent things to assert. And then it goes on to say, therefore, no person born in this country or brought from overseas ought to be holden by law to serve any person as a servant, slave, or apprentice after arriving to the age of 21 years, unless bound by the person's own consent after arriving to such age, or bound by law for the payment of debts, damages, fines, costs, or the like. So rather than just be completely straightforward and unequivocal about saying, you know, there's no slavery or indentured servitude, there's, you know, some kind of confusing language, sort of archaic language in there. So I've divided it up into kind of 3 parts that seem to be rather problematic. So the yellow highlight, so would anybody like to just explain, like pretend you're talking to a 10-year-old, how would you explain?
That's children.
Okay, so yeah, so it makes
And it's even people that aren't children that are under 21.
under 21, yeah. So it seems to be an exception for people under 21.
Slaves, right?
That's, yeah, that I think anybody reading the plain language of the text would, you know, could reasonably come to that conclusion. Now, we had in the legislature, we had historians and constitutional lawyers who argued that that's not what they meant. But it seems to be what they said. So, right, exactly. And yeah, we don't have, footnotes in the Constitution or a man to go around with you to explain it to you every time you read it, right? So I'll say a little bit more about why they say it. It doesn't say what it says, but anyway, it seems to imply that a person under 21, right, can be a slave. The blue part talks about, a person's own consent. Well, I mean, we all know that there are such things as coercion or lacking in, actual choices. So sometimes you consent to things that you'd rather not, right? And that happened certainly in the 1700s and 1800s. And then being bound by law for the payment of debts, damages, fines, costs, or the like. Does that language remind anybody of any other document? What's that? Debt, yeah, that's right. Debtor's prison, English time. Okay, well, next slide, please. Well, so those are the three exceptions that I've just gone over. And sorry, next slide again. And there we go. So that part reminds us actually of the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. As many people don't realize that it says neither slavery nor indentured servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So only 22% of Americans are aware that this is what the 13th Amendment to the Constitution actually says, that there's an exception for the abolition of slavery for punishment of a crime. 78% of Americans have no idea that that's what's in our US Constitution. And they think that slavery, has been abolished completely and was abolished at the end of the Civil War. Yes, yeah, and I'll get to some of that. Yes, yeah. So actually, next slide, please. So actually, Vermont, it's more accurate to say that rather than completely outright abolishing slavery, us being the first state to do that, we were the first state to kind of bring up slavery in the Constitution and to talk about it and to set parameters for it. And in fact, 25 other states followed our lead after 1777. And the Northwest Ordinance, which was set up to govern the settling of the frontier as we moved west, also established an exception. And then, as I just pointed out, the US Constitution also set up the exception. So it's actually more accurate to say that Vermont kind of brought up the whole issue about how is slavery abolished? Should it be completely abolished? No, it shouldn't. So it's not that we did really abolish slavery. So next slide, please. So enter then proposal 2, which was really first instigated by Mark Hughes at the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. But I am happy and proud to say that I was the senator that introduced the language back when I was in the state Senate. Thank you. Although, but it's always a team effort to do these things, and most of the senators signed on to the proposal. But at any rate, it had to go through committee, and this is what the what we came up with after lots of discussions and testimony and everything. So striking out basically all that archaic language, and then replacing it with, therefore, slavery and indentured servitude in any form are prohibited. So much more straightforward, much less confusing, much more direct and simple and easy for anybody to understand. So that's what you're voting on, basically, is striking out the old and writing in that new simple language. So next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about, why is it important? What has slavery meant to our country and to our state, and what are the ramifications of this? So why should we still care about slavery? So in the United States, in America, the new colonies, the first documented slaves were brought here in 1619. There might have been slaves earlier than that, but that was the first documentation. The British Empire continued to bring slaves to the colonies steadily throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. And by 1776, when some people were celebrating their freedom and independence, others were legally enslaved in every colony. Next slide, please. The numbers have been tracked well. So the US Census was started in 1790, and it tracked slaves and free blacks from 1790 until 1860. And so in 1790, there were 698,000 slaves, and that represents 18% of the United States population, and only 60,000 free blacks. And then 70 years later, there were 4 million slaves that made up 12.5% of the US population. So obviously the white settlers increased at a greater pace than the slaves, but still 12.5% is a large percentage of the population. And there were 400,000 free black people. Next slide, yeah. So many more actually that were transported. 12 to 13 million Africans were transported to America as slaves during those decades. And then several million people additionally did not survive the journey. I mean, we've all seen the horrors of what those ship passages were like, with people dying of malnutrition or dying of disease or being beaten to death. And some years, an estimated 23% of the people transported didn't survive. Next, please. So, we can trace attempts to address slavery from our constitutions all the way through the Civil War. I particularly highlighted some of the most important ones. Already we've talked about Vermont's example. Then, some people think the Emancipation Proclamation got rid of slavery in our country, but you may know that Lincoln wrote that only to apply to the states that were in rebellion against his own authority. So they didn't recognize his authority. And he abolished it there. And then the 13th Amendment was ratified, though, very quickly after the Civil War in 1865. But as we've already discussed, that didn't completely get rid of slavery either. So we've never really lived in a country where slavery was completely abolished. Next slide, please. Reconstruction got off to a really good start. There were civil rights acts in 1866 and 1875. And they affirmed the equality of all men before the law, but that's a different discussion. But anyway, they also prohibited racial discrimination in public places and made it a crime to deny accommodations or services on the basis of color, race, or previous condition of servitude. So all good things. Next slide. But where there were evil people who had designs on continuing the evil, they found ways around that. So black codes were established, which was basically black people being not only arrested for, but imprisoned for very low level crimes like vagrancy and loitering and petty theft, things that white people would not have even been arrested for. And then once they were in prison, convict leasing became a very common practice. So people, plantation owners or business owners could pay a fee to the prisons, and the convicts would come out and do labor for them and not get paid for their labor. And blacks were not able to rent housing or buy land. If they were paid a pittance for their labor. Adults were forced into labor contracts, and children were into quote unquote apprenticeships. So many of them continued to work on the same plantations where they had been enslaved. So their lives, in practice were hardly different from the way that they had been before. Next. And so this paved the way for Jim Crow laws. So what happened was that the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment provided all kinds of good protections, and on paper we're very, very good and forward thinking, but very similar to what has happened here in the United States recently. There were Supreme Court cases that basically overturned both of the amendments and took away the rights that were enshrined in them, and said that basically that discrimination could not be prohibited. And this was in 1883, and that vote was actually 8-1 So it was even worse. It was even worse back then than it is now. Next slide, please. So, so that meant then that segregation, any kind of Jim Crow law was open, it was open season. So segregation in all kinds of ways, parks, restaurants, buildings, public pools, hospitals, all over the place. That was allowed. Marriage and cohabitation was prohibited. Blacks couldn't register to vote. And, we know that many of these things started in the South, but they've spread to every region of the country. So they were prevalent all across the nation. So, so incarceration then has kind of come out of this, the kind of sort of natural flow. So convict leasing, which, we had with the Black codes, has been replaced, as Joanna already brought this up, by unpaid or underpaid labor by prisoners. And, different states have different practices. In Vermont, we do have our incarcerated people making our license plates, and they do some work on road crews. Our Department of Corrections says they do get paid for that, and it's entirely voluntary whether they apply for those positions or not. But in other states, that's not true. But it's very obvious that Black people are certainly affected by these kinds of practices, much more so than white people are, because Blacks are incarcerated at 6.4 times the rate of whites, even though they're lower numbers in the general population. And then the war on drugs was actually kind of a intentional way of incarcerating great numbers of people of color. And this was this happened under both parties, presidents of both parties, Nixon, Reagan, and Clinton. And so now we have private prisons, which I think you could certainly make the argument that anybody who makes money off of incarcerating other people is, kind of a slave owner in a sense. And then, sending prisoners to other states, which actually Vermont does, can also be interpreted as human trafficking, because we're sending people across state lines against their will. And Vermont we still send prisoners to Mississippi, and actually we send them to a CoreCivic, a private-owned facility. Next slide, please. So incarceration is one of the legacies of slavery, mass incarceration that really disproportionately affects Black people. Another ramification of the legacy of slavery is poverty itself. And there's lots and lots of data about how race is embedded in poverty. I'll just show you two different graphs. This one is the poverty rate by race from 1989 to 2019. And you'll see that the poverty rate for Black people is more than twice what it is for white people. Next slide. And then this is the median household income. And so you'll see actually Asian households have the highest incomes, median incomes. And but again, Black people are at the very bottom of the median household income. So thank you. So incarceration, poverty, and then another really big one is the racial wealth gap. So when families are able to acquire wealth, accumulate wealth, and then pass it on to successive generations, wealth can be built. People can, one generation can do better than the one before it. But that is, again, very directly tied to race. So the net worth of white families is almost $200,000, the median. And then for Blacks, it's about 40,000. So it's huge disparity there. And then next slide, please. And this has happened over generations for a variety of reasons. Racially restrictive covenants have been placed in land and housing deeds. So the deed to a property actually says that Black people can't own the property. Redlining, you've probably all heard of that. That was banks, financial institutions refused to issue mortgages to Black Americans in certain sections of cities. Black people, they qualified for the GI Bill, but Black veterans, but they didn't really have any place to spend the money because they couldn't go to the colleges and universities and they couldn't buy the land. The segregation due to Jim Crow laws, and even as recently as 2008, the subprime mortgage crisis disproportionately affected Black people.
Debbie, could you please? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what the Jim Crow laws were specifically.
Yeah, so segregation, keeping Blacks had to have Black buildings and Black water fountains, and and white people had separate ones. They couldn't intermarry, no racial intermarriage, not being allowed to vote, Black people not being allowed to vote, but those kinds of laws. Yeah.
And that was national?
Yeah, that was everywhere. It was all across. It was state. I mean, it was done by states, but but all the states did it. Yeah. So just to focus specifically on Vermont, the population percentage of Black people in Vermont is only 1.5%, but they make up 9.9% of our prison population. The Black population at or below poverty is 25.9%. It's 10.4 for whites. The unemployment rate is higher for Blacks than for whites in Vermont. And you see the US also. So it certainly exists here. Next slide, please. And this is home ownership. So just the far left is white people own homes, 72% own homes and 28% rent. And it's pretty much flipped for Black Vermonters. Only 24% own homes and 76% rent. Next slide. So there are attempts that, so I hope that is those are some good reasons for us to want to address slavery. I mean, the idea is that this wound that we created at the beginning of our country when it was being founded has just continued to fester and has created this gross inequality, inequity throughout our history. So, it's time to do something about these things, right? So there is a movement to close the loophole in the US Constitution, and that they're working on that. So next slide, please. And then there are movements in many states. So this is a map of where there are exceptions for crimes in constitutions, and then Alabama and Vermont a little bit different, but you see lots of states have these exceptions. Next. Just like our constitution does. So you can be enslaved for punishment. And so the Abolish Slavery National Network does exist and provides support for the movements in different states. There have been 4 states that have abolished slavery outright: Rhode Island, Colorado, Nebraska, and Utah in 2018. And then there are other states that are kind of in process of trying to get these things on their ballots. Actually, I should update this. So the 5 they're doing it this year are Vermont, Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Oregon. Actually, California is interesting because California had legislation going, and the prison industry pushed back very hard on them, and the legislators pulled the legislation. Yeah. So they'll have to fight another day. And then, just sometimes it's easier for an outside entity to see something about your own culture. So the United Nations has actually declared that the United States remains a chronically segregated society, and they have proof in many different places: poverty, infant mortality, unemployment, earnings, incarceration. Next slide. So their conclusion from this is these shameful statistics can only be explained by long-standing structural discrimination on the basis of race, reflecting the enduring legacy of slavery. Next slide. So just kind of quickly go through this. Vermont there are good things about what Vermont has already done. I don't want to disparage Vermont completely. I do think we are making progress. We have publicly acknowledged that there is systemic racism. We created the Office of the Executive Director of Racial Equity, and she's doing a great job. She even got more money to hire more staff last year. So, you know, those are all good signs that we recognize this in Vermont. Next slide, please. And so, and then also, we felt that passing this amendment to the Constitution would be another good step that we could take. And it's not easy to amend the Vermont Constitution. You can only do it certain years, and it has to start in the Senate. And then amendments are assigned to committees the way that bills are. So this one went to the Government Operations Committee. And once they come out of committee, they cannot be amended on the floor. So there was a lot of wrangling and discussion, and I worked with a lot of my colleagues to, you know, make sure that this got out of the committee and onto the floor. And the President Pro Tem Tim Ash at the time was really great about that. So at any rate, it got out of the Senate. So once it gets out of the Senate, the first time it has to pass the Senate by a 2/3 majority, and then it goes to the House. And again, it cannot be amended. The House can't make any changes, and the House votes just a majority vote. And then it has to happen all over again in the next 2-year cycle. So the second time the Senate, though, can pass it by a simple majority, but also the House has to pass it again. And then once all of that has happened, it goes, doesn't go to the governor, it goes to the people. And so that's where we are now. So that's why the people get to vote on, you know, on this in the general election. So, so just to kind of summarize why I think it's important for us to pass Proposition 2, because we've heard lots of different arguments about why we don't need it. But I think we need it because we're making a moral stance. We're saying that we know that slavery is morally abhorrent and that should be unambiguously prohibited. And I think that's a good thing for a society to do. And then even if we don't have chattel slavery now, but, you know, slavery on plantations, it has been the precursor of slavery in other forms that do continue to exist. Like mass incarceration and poverty and the wealth gap. And so to address this kind of systemic racism today, we have to acknowledge the legacy of our past. We have to acknowledge that these things have come from slavery. So don't really need to go through the campaign time. We're what, 6 days, 5 days out now. So we've been working though since since last year. Actually, it's probably been over a year that we've been doing this. You know, we've been doing phone banking and social, you know, and if you think there are people who, you know, that everybody supports this and there aren't any people who would possibly oppose this, I invite you to go to the Vermont Interfaith Action Facebook page and see the responses to the ads and the posting boosts that we've done. And you'll see people Vermonters who think this is a huge waste of time, and it's just more of the wokeness that's being thrust upon good Vermonters. And you know, we don't need this crap. So and they say it in less kind ways. So anyway, we're doing all we can, and we're hopeful, but it's certainly not. I don't think it's a no-brainer. You know, we're glad that we've put a lot of effort into it. So yes, questions. Thank you.
A very nonpartisan mode of Rotary. Could you now make the argument against it?
Against it? No. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess the most that people will say is we don't need it because it's already been done. But I don't even think that's I don't even think that's you know, it got multi-partisan support in the legislature. There was one senator that voted against it, who was a Democrat actually. And then there were three people in the House that voted against it. So it's, you know, and we've reached out to all three parties to ask them to help support it. So there's, yeah, there's very little opposition. I mean, there's very little cogent, rational argument against it, I think. Okay, we'll go here and then Marty.
What is your reaction to the Supreme Court cutting down the affirmative action program?
Yeah, well, yeah, these are all, you know, conversations I think we need to have. You know, I think though we still have plenty of it. We should base it on evidence. I mean, there's so much data about, you know, whether people of color get the same kind of opportunities. You know, do they really have, is there really a level playing field? So that's why the idea of equity is so much more important than just equality. Because people from different circumstances don't have the same opportunities necessarily that other people do. And just to make it all the same for everybody still means that some people are going to be left out. So, you know, I mean, I don't have the answers to, I've supported affirmative action in the past. I think there are a lot of good things about it. I mean, I think we need to keep talking about these things and really looking at the evidence as to whether or not people of color are getting the same kinds of opportunities that other people are.
The data kind of shows that they are.
Yeah.
So this is, to me, this is the attitude that we need to take in order to promote land use.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Marty.
Just a brief observation. This is the extremely rare situation where you have red and blue states on the same page.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah. And it's been a real privilege we have Zoom calls every couple of weeks with the people from other states that are leading. So we have Oregon and Vermont, and then we have Louisiana, Alabama, and Tennessee. Well, they were, that's true. And just getting it through the legislatures was, it was great to share in that with them. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where does restitution come into play for this? I mean, I know there's been talk about it for quite a long while. Is that tied into this kind of discussion, or is that a totally separate piece?
Yeah, or reparations. No, I think, again, I think it's like affirmative action. I mean, I think all those things need to come out in more informed discussion and based on data. I saw something recently about the financial industry, for instance, has been particularly egregious at treating people of color badly. And there's a new book out, it's called The White Wall, and the author, who's white, was advocating that financial services companies should change some of their policies to favor, very much like affirmative action, to favor Black people, to make up for the way that they have discriminated against them in the past, and that can be considered a form of reparations. So yeah, I think all of these things should be on the table, and we should be cognizant of the gross inequity, and not just have a knee-jerk reaction about, they're trying to make me feel guilty or whatever. It's like, let's look at the data. Let's look at really what's going on, in our country. So I see I'm getting the hook. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Boy, there's a lot there. We can have coffee several days in a row. So before we go to Sergeant at Arms, and before we take the raffle tickets, Greg, you had an announcement you wanted to make. Preferably unmuted. Yep.
Thanks so much, Sally. Apologies for being late today. We were an administrator down here, so some different duties that we're covering for. So two things. I'll be quick. First of all, I wanted to let people know that Lyric Theater's production of Into the Woods is opening a week from today. And there are still tickets. As of a couple of days ago, there were still some tickets available. My son Cole is the music director for the show. So he's conducting the pit orchestra and has directed all the music for the show. So it's pretty exciting. It's his first time doing that particular gig. And so that's Into the Woods, Lyric Theater. All the information can be found on the Lyric Theater website at the Flynn. Opens 1 week from tonight. And the other thing is a little self-serving here. The school is looking for substitute teachers and volunteers. So substitutes, many of you know what that's all about. You get to choose when you work. You can turn jobs down. We're looking for anybody interested to being added to our list of regular subs. We're really in dire need. And then if you're looking for a possibility of a volunteer opportunity, maybe a little bit of a shorter amount of time, we're thinking about, we'd love to get an alternative lunch and recess opportunity up and running for some of our 3rd and 4th grade students. So these are 8, 9 year olds, 10-year-olds. Some of them find the cafeteria really loud, don't do particularly well at recess. So having some different options for a smaller group of kids in a separate location, card games, just a quiet place to eat. Lunchtime lasts 45 minutes, lunch and recess lasts 45 minutes. So we're looking at kind of putting this alternative program in place, but are in need of volunteers to make it run. So anybody can email me with interest. Thanks so much for the little time here. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, so now we're gonna pick the raffle card. Who did not buy a ticket? Eric. Eric's gonna pick.
You
a
just
card.
volunteered. I'll pick the one. You're the bad guy here, or good guy, depending on.
So you do the last 3 numbers?
Yep.
056. We have a winner.
Who won that?
I do.